The next category is called bristle brushes, and they are trying to simulate traditional media brushes. So if you go in there, you will find this one as a default one already coming up. Just have to pick a color, a stroke color for it, maybe something like that, and choose the brush tool, of course, paintbrush tool. And immediately I can see a preview which shows me that this type of brush can actually pick up not just the strength, how I use the tablet, but also the angle in which I hold the pen over the tablet. Once again, these are things that you won't be able to use if you are working with a mouse. You will need to have a tablet, a drawing tablet. So why is this useful? Well, depending on the angle I hold it, I will always get a different profile. So if I draw it in another way, you can see it is much less thicker because of the angle I held my pen. These type of brushes are quite nice and soft. That's what I like in them. So this is probably the least vector looking brush category. It's more like watercolor or oil, and definitely when you start adding it up and there's more of them layer on layer, it starts to look even more convincing that it wasn't made of vectors. The only problem with them is that if you use them a lot, it can get quite slow to compute and to scale them, or to just generally work with them. So try to use it sparingly. But what they are great for is drawing hair, for example, or fur. So let me just show that to you quickly. Using the same settings that I have here, I'm just going to draw quickly a few strokes. And as you can see, this could be the base or the foundation of hair, someone's hair, but it could also be a monster, a furry monster. And I actually created the face already here. Let me just put it on top of it and bring it forward. There you go. Of course, these brushes have their settings as well, so if I double click on it, I will find a lot of options that I can play with. And these are all the different types of shape presets from which you can choose. Make sure you spend some time experimenting with this category as well, especially if you have a tablet. But don't ignore them even if you just have a mouse, because you can still use it. You might not be able to make use of all its settings, but they are still great fun to work with. Personally, I work with bristle brushes quite less, but I'm going to show you my favorite category in the next video called pattern brushes. In this final video of this chapter, I'm going to show you the last category of brushes called image brushes. This feature might not be available in previous versions, but it's definitely available in the Creative Cloud version of Illustrator. And essentially what these brushes are for is to use photographs or pixel images and stretch them along vector paths. You can use PNGs, JPEGs, and all you have to do to bring them into Illustrator is to go to File, Place. You can experiment with these examples that I will show you in this video, but you can also try it with your own ones. One thing that I would recommend to do is to use transparent PNGs. You can see both of these examples are actually see-through, so there's no white background or anything like that. That way you can use them on any different background colors and they will still work perfectly. So transparency is key if you are using image brushes. Now, if you're not familiar with how to bring in images and work with them in Illustrator, because so far we only work with vector objects, then you might want to watch the next chapter and come back to this video after that, because the next chapter is all going to be about working with images and how to import, trace them, and so on and so forth. As I mentioned earlier, Illustrator is mainly a vector application, but this technique is one of the exceptions where you actually need to work with images, pixel images, and combine them with the Illustrator drawing techniques we already talked about. So let's just see how this looks like. Here's this reference image that I brought in, the hair PNG. You can see the file name as well here on the top. And it says it's a linked file. That's how it came up when I placed it into this Illustrator document. So if I go to brushes and I just simply drag this in there, it's going to give me these options. And there's no category called image brush, because you can use images either as scatter, art, or pattern brushes. And these are the categories we already talked about. So they will work exactly the same way, but now instead of using vector objects as the basis of the brush, it will be repeating or stretching the pixel image that you are using. So let me try to turn this one into an art brush, and then I will click OK. Then an error message comes up, and this is important. I intentionally wanted this to come up. So if you use an image as a brush, you have to make sure it is not linked. So how do we unlink it then? I just click OK, and all you have to do is to click on this linked file option here in the options bar, and there you will find all the images that are linked currently. I can select all three of them, click on the drop down here, and I can choose embed images. Once I do that, these little icons will come up here, and that means these PNG files are now embedded into my Illustrator document, which is quite useful, to be honest, not just for creating brushes from them, but also because now if I just give this Illustrator file to anyone else without sending the PNGs as well, they will still be available because now they are embedded. So it's almost like combining these files into one. So now that they are embedded, I should be able to create a brush from them. So let's start with this one here. I just drag it in and I choose art brush. Then I'm going to click OK. And here I can decide the direction and how I want to use this. If you remember from the art brushes video, I showed you all the different methods of doing this, but I'm just going to keep it as is for now. So I'm going to click OK. And then I select the paintbrush. Having that brush selected, I can already start drawing. And you can see what this could be great for is to draw hair. So I already showed the bristle brushes that can be used for something similar, but this might look even more convincing. And of course you can draw longer as well, and then it will still fit it quite nicely. Now what I recommend to do if you want to use a brush like this is to save a couple of different versions of it, even if it's just slightly amended in color or in shape, because if it's all the same, then it will look a little bit too obvious. So at least have 2 or 3 different versions from which you can start drawing. And you can create images like this from photographs quite easily. So I would do that in Photoshop, prepare the PNG, save it, and then I can bring it into Illustrator. Now here's another really cool example. Let me just put all these hair details together into a group, and I'm going to reduce them in size so they can sit here on the top. So here's another one that we can turn into an image brush, this gold chain. So if I drag and drop it into the brushes panel, I can now choose a different type, the pattern brush, because that will work much better with this. And then I will click OK. And without changing anything here, I can already start using this. So if I click OK, I can select the paintbrush tool and start drawing, and there you go. The chain is already created. So it's really cool the way it works. As long as you manage to create and save an image that can be repeated, so you have to be careful how you crop it and bring it in. So make sure that it's not too obvious where the repeat is. Like here I can see it, and then on the other one again somewhere there, and there's another one. So it's still visible, but it's not as obvious. And that is the main concern whenever you want to save pattern brushes from images. Make sure the beginning and the end is as close as possible so it can continue and create a loop. But more importantly, we can actually create an end and a beginning point for it, so like a head and tail option. And all I have to do for that is to use this other image that I prepared here. I intentionally have it separately saved because that way I can add this onto the existing brush that we already have there. So all I have to do is to drag it and then hold down the Alt key and move it all the way to the slot here on the right. Notice that we have a couple of slots. We need the one just second from the right. Okay. So that will be the beginning point. So that's how it's going to start whenever you start drawing. If I click OK, that's going to be added, and I can already apply it to my strokes, and I can see how it's going to look like. And then what you need to do is to select this image and use the reflect tool and reflect it onto the other side. So click and drag. You can hold down the shift key to make sure it stays perfectly straight, and then drag it, hold it down the alt key and place it onto the last slot. When you let go, you will see exactly where that goes, and I can click OK, and again I just choose apply to strokes. So now we have a beginning and an end point, and in between it will always create that loop and repeat the actual pattern for as long as your path is going. So let's try this now. If I just move this out of the way a bit and delete these as well. So having that brush selected, if I draw a little bit more complex shape, you can see it works perfectly. Now there is a subtle gap between the endpoints and the actual middle section, and that is something you can improve, or better to say hide, by double clicking on the brush definition and reducing the scaling. So reducing the scaling will make the whole necklace thinner, but that way it's a little bit less visible where those gaps are. So if I click OK and apply to strokes, we can see it looks much better, but let's draw a new line. So maybe I will draw something like that, and then we can try another one. So what you get is a little bit less division between the segments. And similarly to the other brushes that I showed you before, again, don't forget that every brush can be used with objects as well. If I created a circle and click on this brush, it will create a closed shape. So in this case, it won't even use the beginning and end point. So these were the two examples I wanted to give you. And in this chapter, I don't have a separate video for giving you separate exercises, because in each category that I showed you, I gave you examples that you can practice with. But if you found this topic interesting, it would be great if you could create your own unique brushes and experiment with all the settings that we went through. Because getting to know the brushes and their settings in Illustrator is one of the most important features, because they are very versatile and can be used for so many different things. And the reason why I ended with the image brush category is because our next big chapter is going to be about working with images.